Hey guys, what is going on? Welcome to patch 3.0 new tier list for all the champions in every single role. Thanks to G2A for sponsoring channel, reference link in the description below. Not going to waste your time with a load of blah blah blah. Let's get straight into the tier list. This is my rune tier list. You'll notice that it has not changed from the last patch. That is because the runes have not changed. Conqueror still stands as the absolute god rune. You'll notice that, one second, I'm just going to get something sorted here. There we go. Cool. You'll notice that Grasp, Fleet Footwork, Summonary, and Aftershock are all in A tier. This is because they are frequently used across a multitude of other champions. Electrocute, I think, is a little bit inferior to Conqueror in most circumstances, but there are a few champions that would rather use Electrocute, mostly burst damage mages in the mid lane, but some champions do like to use Electrocute over Conqueror, but for the most part, Conqueror remains relatively superior. Font of Life, ever since the nerf, has become relatively useless outside of using it on Braum, and I still think Phase Rush is ridiculously niche and isn't as important in wildrift than it is in League, especially because the map is a lot smaller and gap closing is a lot easier, and just in general, Phase Rush is not as important. But Conqueror is still the absolute GOAT rune because there isn't really anything else that can replace it. Let's get on to the Baron lane now, and this is the Baron lane tier list. In my opinion, the best Baron laner that you can pick in almost any scenario is either going to be Renekton, Jace, or Fiora. I will say that Renekton and Fiora are almost always good picks. They have very few counters and will always do well in a game. Jace is a little bit user intensive, but if you're very good at Jace, he's probably one of the most dominant champions in the game. I'm not as good at Jace, so I will always usually pick Renekton. Otherwise, I've been playing a bit of Fiora recently as well. Renekton is easier to play than Fiora, but has just as much payoff, in my opinion, and has a much better teamfight presence than Fiora, especially in the mid game. I think Renekton is silly strong, and I think he's absolutely one of the best Baron laners in the game right now. Below that, you have things like Garen, Gragas, who I still think is solid, especially as Tank Gragas, although you don't see Tank Gragas that much anymore. I think he's maybe been overlooked a little bit. I do think he's pretty good. The problem is he can't duel very easily with the likes of Renekton and Fiora, and it's a little bit easier to push him out of lane, but I still think, tanks in general are really good for a composition, right? So there is a reason that I rate Malphite and Gragas high, as well as Garen, realistically. There's a reason I rate these guys high. And the reason being is that tanks are good for your solo queue compositions. In general, you will win more games with a tank in your team than you'll lose. And that's because tanks are in general just sort of, no one wants to play them, but they are very important roles in the game. And I've added Darius because he's kind of popped back in as, again, another good go-to Baron laner that has very, few really bad matchups. I've moved things like Camille down. The reason I moved Camille down is because I think she's kind of coming back in the jungle a little bit. But also, just again, she's got good matchups into Darius. She's got good matchups into Garen, for instance, and can even do well into Gragas. But she isn't as strong as she was just because of the way the meta is right now. Just getting payoff from Camille is a little harder than it used to be. And I think Camille coming back in the jungle as well, you'll find that you start to see her more being played in the jungle role than anything. Riven, she's solid. She just got a buff on the last patch, but I don't think it's good enough to suddenly make her laning that much better than it was. I've moved Kayle down to A+. The reason being is I think Kayle does kind of suck right now. However, what I would say about Kayle is that she's still good in the late game. It's just that it's not an auto win. What used to happen is that if you got Kayle to level 10 at least, she would be super strong and she'd start to take over a game. That's no longer the case anymore, and you really need level 15 to be good. And don't get me wrong, when you hit level 15, you are really good still. But getting level 15 is really hard in any game. And also, she's not actually an auto win at level 15 like she used to be. I think people have A, figured out how to counter her early, and B, figured out how to deal with her in teamfight situations as well. And things like hard engage, like Malphite, anything they can get on top of Kayle and make her burn her ultimate very early on is always going to make her feel a little useless at any stage of the game, realistically. Pantheon, Akali, blah 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 blah. Down in A tier, these are just champions that are solid. Like, these are champions that are pretty solid. you wouldn't rave about them like being in the top lane. There's a reason like right, Lucian is decent and Kennen is decent, you know, as ranged counters in the top lane. And maybe I underrate Kennen here a little bit, but he doesn't feel as impactful as he used to. But what I would say is that, you know, I always prefer having a melee bruiser or a melee tank in the top lane. And I think having a ranged addition in the top lane makes your comp a little weak, especially putting Lucian up there if you end up having an AD carry and a ranged in mid. Like, it ends up making your comp a little weak, and you need to snowball with this type of comp to make it work. That's why my ranged picks are a little lower than the sort of the standard go-to melee picks, is because even though in isolation these picks work well in the laning phase, like, you know, Lucian is going to batter most ranged top laners in the Baron lane, right? Kennen is very good into most ranged Baron laners. Sorry, most melee Baron laners. But compositionally, unless you are able to snowball with Kennen's ultimate or you're able to snowball with Lucian, compositionally, they make your comp feel a bit crap if you've got a ranged mid laner. And because there aren't that many good tank junglers, it's not like your jungle can make up for you picking up a squishy Baron laner. So I just underrate them because I feel like it really offsets how good your comp could be if you picked one of the more, I would say, flexible, bruisery tank type champions that I think are really good in the Baron lane. Down here, you know, Yasuo, I think he's got too many bad matchups in Baron lane. I've moved Jarvan down because I've played so much Jarvan in the Baron lane recently, and I just feel like it's super niche. You have to be, I think, in a competitive team to really make Jarvan in the Baron lane work. His damage scaling just isn't good enough, and he isn't actually that tanky, despite really kind of he's supposed to be a tank. He doesn't really feel that tanky compared to a lot of the other tanks, and that's because he doesn't have much inbuilt damage reduction, whereas people like, you know, Garen, Gragas, even Malphite to an extent with the way he scales with armor, they've got some kind of inbuilt reason to go tank, and Jarvan doesn't really have that. His shield's also kind of pathetic on his W or his second ability. And of course, Teemo sucks. I've actually moved Nasus down. Nasus just isn't in a good place in the Baron lane right now. There are too many picks that just absolutely crush him in the laning phase. And, you know, Renekton beats him, Jace beats him, Fiora, like almost everything beats Nasus in the laning phase. And so there's kind of like hyper stacking Baron laner that doesn't ever want to move and also doesn't split push that well until later into the game. Doesn't feel like a good place for Nasus to be right now. Jungle, not much has changed here. Lee Sin and Kha'Zix still remain absolutely like goated in my opinion. Like, these are the two like go-to best picks for solo queue. Jace is a great jungler. Nunu's like the only good viable tank jungler in the game. Rengar, great solo queue pick. Evelynn, again, like anything that's like assassin, a bit focused, or can one-shot people, very good at ganking, especially post-level 5. These are the kind of champions that are, you know, do quite well in solo queue. I've moved Pantheon up because I actually think Pantheon's in a really strong spot right now. I think Edge of Night has made him a really good champion as well. I think just giving a lot of these lethality AD champions an extra item that A, protects them, but also B, gives them more lethality to build is actually been a nice addition into the game. Camille in the jungle, I really rate her again. And Vi, I've always been a big fan of Vi. In terms of A tier, A plus tier, not much crazy there. I think Riven did just get buffed, so she might end up being a bit better than I'm giving her credit for. But again, with Riven, she's very snowbally, and you have to be a really good Riven player to really make use of her to her full extent. I think Fiora jungle is really good. Morgana, I actually have been talking to a couple of junglers, Doom being one of them, although he is an AD carry main now. He says that Morgana is one of the few champions that can actually clear all 5 camps in the game on first rotation. So like, and like get it done in time. So she's really got a really quick jungle clear. And she's in general just, I think, maybe one of the up and coming AP junglers that we can look out for right now. I think Rammus is solid. You know, I think he's okay. No pun intended. I do think that, you know, there aren't many good tank junglers, and we always underestimate Rammus, I think, in terms of his impact, especially in low elos. I would say that most high elo players that I've seen know how to deal with Rammus, and I would say that Rammus only really becomes super viable when you're dealing with very heavy base attack focused compositions. So Rammus might get pulled out when you've got like 2 AD carries, or you've got a strong auto attack based AD jungle. But for the most part, I'd say that he's got a slow clear speed. A lot of high elo junglers know how to deal with him, so I don't want to put him too much higher. Masti and Tryndamere. Tryndamere just got nerfed, but again, I'm not super convinced that these champions are nutty. They probably are, and I want to just give you the framing. When you see champions get nerfed by Riot, they are nerfing them based on a huge set of criteria that spans every level of play. And when I am playing, I'm playing at what they would consider the elite level of play, which is, you know, like master to high challenger, right? That's what Riot would consider, I guess, elite. So when I play, I'm basing my opinions based on what I see in my solo queue games. But I'm not playing in gold. I'm not playing in silver. I'm not playing in platinum or emerald. And therefore, what is good at those levels is much more and much wider. You know, I guess it's more open to interpretation. Like the low mechanical skill, like easy to exploit champions generally do better in low elo because they have more impact if you can't shut them down in high elo, right? But that's my, you know, just my thought process. I've moved Shyvana to the very bottom of the pack because every time I play with a Shyvana, she gets absolutely railed. And I think if I'm going to have a basic attack focused champion, I'd rather have one that doesn't rely on dragons to be good. The problem with Shyvana is she kind of needs dragons to be good. And if you lose dragons, she just becomes worse than these two in terms of carry potential. But there we go. Mid lane. Okay, so not much has shifted in mid lane. I still think Jace is one of the strongest champions in the game right now. Orianna, Galio, Ziggs, and Zed are like my favorite 5, you know, best champions for the mid lane right now. I think Galio is so good in mid, like tank Galio and also AP Galio. He's really impactful in solo queue. He's great team fight presence. I just love Galio. I think he's really strong. In terms of S tier, I've moved Twisted Fate up. Yasuo, Diana, Irelia, Twisted Fate, and Irelia, Lucian. I think these guys are all really strong. Lucian, you don't tend to see as much in solo queue, weirdly enough, but I think it's mostly because people play him in the AD carry role. But I do think he's a very viable mid laner. A+ tier, I've actually moved Katarina and Corki down. A few reasons. Corki, you don't see him that much anymore. I don't think people like rate him as highly as they used to, and I think people are kind of splitting in between mid and AD carry. In terms of Katarina, I think I have not lost to a Katarina in a good few weeks. And I think the reason for that is that more and more champions are getting added into the game that have got disruptive CC in their kit. I think Alistar has come back into meta. I think Galio is super, super strong and a viable pick in mid lane. I think there are too many now ways to stop a Katarina from being impactful in games that you know what's going on, right? So I would say in most of the high elo games that I've played, where there is a Katarina, even if she gets fed in the early game, there was a Katarina that I had that was like 7-1, and she still lost the game because eventually we just super focused on just knocking her out of her ultimate every time, and she just couldn't do anything. She had no damage. And so I think Katarina slowly starting to come down the tier list as more people understand how to counter her, and also she becomes less relevant as a pick. Ahri, decent pick. Like Ari's like just a decent mid lane pick. I put Annie in A+. I actually really rate Annie. I think Hextech Proto Belt, you know, Proto Belt enchant for boots with Annie is super strong, and I think people massively underrate how good Annie is in this game with basically an extra flash every 60 seconds. I think the thing that there was a Challenger 1 trick in League PC called Annie Bot, and he would just play Annie, and he did an AMA a few years ago, and I distinctly remember an answer saying, he goes, like, they were like, how do you win games with Annie? And he goes, if I have flash, we win. If I don't have flash, we don't win. And that's basically what Annie was about. You needed to flash Tibbers to win a fight. But in Wildrift, you've got flash, which is on a lower cooldown, and you've got Proto Belt. And the Proto Belt is not an item, and it doesn't have a super long cooldown. It's a boot enchant, which is a very low cost, and you can also build damage on top of it. So Annie actually has all the tools in Wild Rift to be much better than she was in PC. And I've started to see Annie played a lot more frequently at high elo for that reason. Kayle, same reason as Baron lane. I think good pick if you can survive to level 10 plus, but not the same kind of taking over the game at level 10, and really does need to get to level 15 to be super strong. Move Brand down. I just don't see him get played that much. I think people have finally realized that you don't group up around his ultimate and he doesn't become like annoyingly obnoxious. I also think the Leandri's nerf did hurt him quite a lot. Any other sort of a note here? I've seen Kennen getting played a lot in the mid lane recently. I think he is a relatively solid option. But again, I think the problem with Kennen is he kind of gets outpaced by a load of the mages in this list. But Kennen's ultimate will always be, you know, useful and a great flanking tool. The only problem in this game is that teleport's a little harder to make work than it is in League PC, and also it's not a summoner spell, so you actually have to buy it, and therefore you can't build Zhonya's. And that's the one thing that really hurts Kennen in this game, in my opinion, is that this is like the converse of Annie. You can't build teleport and stasis in this game for Kennen. Stasis is an absolute necessity because of the nature of his ultimate, and therefore that means you can't have teleport. And that actually really limits Kennen's ability to flank. One of the reasons Kennen is so good in PC is because he's very good at finding flank angles, and he uses teleport a lot of the time to set those kind of things up. That is not the case in wildrift, and I think that actually limits Kennen's power. Anything else? I put Lulu in here because I've been seeing some Lulu mid, but I don't think it's good. And I think it's one of those things that you pick to support like a hyper carry jungle or a hyper carry bot lane, and not great in solo queue in my opinion. AD carry. Now this is, I'm going to give massive credit to Doom. So this is not Doom's tier list, but he did give me his support and AD carry tier list put together by himself and Clue from Rix. I used that to help formulate my opinion. Didn't agree with everything because I think some things are only good in the hands of a high elo player like Doom. But it did help me formulate this tier list. And I think Kai'Sa is firmly back. Kai'Sa is massively back in the meta right now. Those little buffs helped her on the last patch massively. So Kai'Sa, really, really good spot right now. Xayah and Lucian. I think Xayah is really strong because of the amount of assassins that we have in the meta, and also the amount of like heavy engaged CC that we've got, and Xayah is always really good as a counter to that. Miss Fortune's very solid. I wouldn't say she's broken tier, but she's very solid. I think people know that in these heavy melee comps that we're seeing right now, that, you know, Seralda's Grudge as an item for Miss Fortune makes a lot of sense. Ezreal, I don't think the buff has made Ezreal OP. I thought the buff was going to be bigger than it was when I looked at the patch notes, but actually it's not as strong as I've previously thought. You get him to 3+ items, you can definitely feel him hurting more, but the problem with Ezreal will always be that you need him to get to 3 items to be good. Tristana is getting played a lot now, man. Doom put Tristana a lot higher on his tier list. I'm not super certain where Tristana lies, but I definitely see her getting played more now. And so maybe the age of Tristana is finally coming, guys, and you can stop spamming in my comments as why Tristana is B tier, because she's now A tier. Caitlyn and Corki. Corki's, again, he's just been dropping off a little bit compared to a lot of the other options right now. I just think the burst damage is a little bit not there for Corki. Caitlyn and Jinx. Jinx is like needs Lulu to be good, otherwise I think she's a bit much of a, she's like a low elo stomper. If we had Lulu, like Jinx I think is S tier, but obviously you need Lulu to make her good. Ooh, Vayne is not in this tier list. Wait a second, guys. Videos. Why did I somehow miss Vayne here? I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna have to do this in a really, really, really ghetto way. Wait a second. Here we go. There we go. Boom. Okay. Vayne's really good. Basically, this is an image that you're seeing on your screen right now, so I have to add another image to put it on top. Vayne's really good, and yeah, I think she's in a strong spot, and I think with Lulu especially in a really, really good spot. Ashe kind of sucks, but I wouldn't say she's like C tier sucks. I think she's okay. Senna is not good as an AD carry, but much better as a fasting, but you would always usually consider her support in that role anyway. Okay, so let's move over to supports. Thresh and Nami, I think, are the best supports in the game right now. I think Nami is the strongest enchanter, and I think Thresh, if you can play him well, is probably one of the strongest engaged type supports that we have in the meta right now. Beyond that, I think Lulu, really, really good still. Alistair has crept his way back up massively in the meta, and I think it's because of just having that hard engage, having a good tank option from the support role. He's pretty good versus enchanters if you can get the engage on him. He's a little weak to... Wait, I was going to say, why is Vayne in the support list? It's because I forgot that I hadn't got rid of her from the AD carries. I think, like, Alistair is one of those picks that, like, he can get really heavily bullied in the laning phase, but, like, once you get out of the laning phase and once you get to those teamfight situations... Sorry, I really need a haircut, as you can see. Once you get into those teamfight situations, I think he's, like, really strong. Really, really strong team fighter. I super rate Braum, and I rate Janna, absolutely. I think Rakan... Leona are really good engaged support options, although I'd say the Rod of Ages nerf did hurt Rakan, which is why I've moved him down slightly. I think Morgana is a solid support. I think she's best played support than any other role, and I actually do rate Senna. I know a lot of people don't rate Senna, and I know Senna is what we call a bait pick, because people who pick Senna generally tend to be terrible with her, but I really love Senna as a support option, and I think she is still pretty good. Lux, Blitzcrank is solid. I know a lot of people playing Blitzcrank, and he is a good anti-enchanter pick, but the problem with Blitzcrank will always be if you miss your hook, you suck. And so yeah, with Thresh you have more backup options, but with Blitzcrank it's like you miss your hook, you suck. Sona, yeah, decent. And I've added in a Mumu here is the only surprise, I think. I actually rate a Mumu support. Double bandage toss, got a lot of good engage in the laning phase. I actually do like a Mumu support, but I haven't been brave enough to test it out in my ranked games yet. So I might give it a go this week and see how we go. Right, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. That was the tier list for patch 3.0. Tell me what you think. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you very soon.